On June 22, 1941, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa upon the Soviet Union. It was an attack that caught the Soviets off guard. The Germans had just signed a non-aggression pact with the Russians, promising not to invade their homeland if the Russians did not involve themselves in the current European war. Hitler's attack quickly swept through the Soviet Union, capturing city after city and displacing millions of civilians. Finally, Stalin issued the order to hold Stalingrad at all costs. No retreat, no surrender. Any deserters would be shot on sight. It's hard for us to truly imagine the conditions of this battle. There were tank factories inside the city that would produce a vehicle, have it leave the factory, turn right, and already be inside the battle. The Nazis took no mercy on anyone, be they soldiers or civilians. This city would become the site of one, if not the single bloodiest battle in recorded human history. The Russians were given orders to keep the city at all costs, or die trying. The Germans were told similar orders to either capture the city or don't come home. Neither side could retreat, only be slaughtered or win. There were more casualties in this 6-month battle than the combined casualties of the US, UK, France, and Italy throughout the entire 6-year span of World War II. Just for reference, the bloodiest battle for the Allies in World War II was the invasion of Normandy, with over 230,000 casualties. At the end of the Battle of Stalingrad, the Germans had over 800,000 casualties, while the Soviets suffered 1.2 million. Stalingrad was the beginning of the end for the Germans in World War II. Red Orchestra is a series of games that has taken place on the Eastern Front of World War II. They have prided themselves on trying to be the most realistic shooter on the market. Every year, Epic Games holds a Make Something Unreal competition, where modders around the world compete using the current iteration of the Unreal Engine to try and create something awesome. Red Orchestra was born out of this competition with its modification of Unreal Tournament 2003. What made Red Orchestra stand out from the others was its emphasis on realism. There wasn't a life bar, and you couldn't regenerate health by simply hiding behind a rock. There was a simple silhouette of a human in the bottom left corner, and depending on when you were shot, the humans would gradually increase in redness until death. Also, depending on which weapon you were shot with could determine the amount of damage dealt to you. If you were hit with a bolt-action rifle in the upper torso or head, it was an instant kill. There was also an absence of crosshairs. If you wanted to aim, you had to aim down the sights, like an actual rifle. In addition, bullets had realistic physics where, due to gravity, bullets dropped over time, and you had to anticipate where your target was running and aim ahead. As the mod aged, new additions were added. Red Orchestra 3.0 introduced vehicles such as tanks and transports. The tank armor was also realistically created, where depending on what ammunition you fired at the tank and the angle of the steel plating that you hit, bullets would either ricochet or penetrate. The original development team won the competition and was awarded with a license of the Unreal 2.5 and 3.0 engine. Because of their victory, Tripwire Interactive was created, and a full-fledged Red Orchestra was announced. Released March 16, 2006, Red Orchestra Ostfront 41-45 was Tripwire's first full-fledged release. Much like the mod, Ostfront was based around realism. Many of the aspects from the mod were enhanced, such as bullet drop and damage based where you were hit. Now, if you were hit and lived, your character would be affected by it. If you were shot in the leg, you would move slower. If you were shot in the hand, you would drop your gun, and reloading would take much longer. It should also be noted that, much like Red Orchestra, Ostfront did not keep track of your ammo. That was your job. When you load your gun, you placed in a full clip, but you didn't have a little counter telling you how much you had left in the gun. You needed to make a mental note and reload accordingly, just like a real soldier. Vehicles returned and had a much larger part. Ostfront also focused a lot on player movement. You can't run or crawl and fire at the same time. You needed to line up your shot and then fire. Breathing also played a bigger role because as your character breathed, the rifle would sway slightly. You could hold your breath to help steady your shot, but only for a limited time. Ostfront had a single player component, but it was merely just multiplayer maps with bots. Red Orchestra's multiplayer is much like the Battlefield series. Each side has a counter with a number of reinforcements. Once the counter reaches 0, or the capture points were held for a specific amount of time, the round was over. Ostfront garnered mostly positive reviews, and this was Tripwire's first game, became a success. If Saving Private Ryan opened our eyes to the horror of war through movies, then Red Orchestra 2 does the same through video games. I've never played a game that is so gritty and in your face before. It is also the single most realistic game I've ever experienced. While Ostfront focused on the entire eastern front of World War II, Red Orchestra 2 focuses all of its energy on the Battle of Stalingrad. I'm going to say realism or realistic a lot in this review, but I really need to detail what exactly that means. Today when you say realism in games, most people think of Counter-Strike or some sort of Tom Clancy game because you can only get shot 2 or 3 times before you die. Well, Red Orchestra 2 is on another planet of realism. There's so much to discuss, but let's talk with the visuals first. Red Orchestra 2 may not win any Best Graphic Awards, but it's superb in what it achieves, taking you to a war-torn land during the bloodiest battle in human history. It's not over the top or gimmicky or completely brown and gray like most modern-day shooters have become. It's what Stalingrad would have looked like in 1942. Much like what the programmers of Stalker did, Tripwire Interactive actually went to Stalingrad and mapped the game's battlegrounds after the city. If there was a Google Maps in the 1940, what you see here is what the satellites would have captured. And it wasn't just the layout of the city that Tripwire recreated, but the buildings at the time as well. The grain elevator seen on the left is what is in the game. What's on the right is the actual elevator. Tripwire then went inside the elevator and mapped the conveyor belts, furnace, windows, everything. It's just another notch of realism to suck you into this world. While the world does a good job of immersing you, it's the soldiers who really shine. Just like in Ostfront, depending on where you are shot will affect your character. Shot in the leg, can't maneuver that fast. Shot in the hands, reloading is longer. There isn't an ammo counter. If you want to know how much you have left in the gun, you have to hold the reload button, and then you'll look inside and it'll either say you have a full magazine, it's almost full, half, below half, or almost empty. There's also a lack of a life bar or auto healing. If you're not severely wounded, you can bandage yourself to stop the bleeding and reduce the effect of the wound. If you don't, you'll eventually bleed out. I also felt really bad for killing some of the enemies too because of the superb voice acting done. Soldiers will scream out in pain, begging you to help them. During artillery barrages, some will cry for their mothers. Or at times, all you hear is them choking on their own blood as their life fades away. Because your character is an actual soldier and not a make-believe, I can regenerate my life by hiding behind a rock soldier, you must pay attention to the world around you. If you hear artillery firing in the distance, you better get indoors. If you see a tank, unless you have some sort of anti-tank gear or a gun or grenade, you better hide. The best way to play Red Orchestra is to ask yourself, if I was really shot by a tank, could I walk away from it? Obviously not. This is as close to war as you can get. Soldiers don't have giant arrows on their heads, and the only way to know if you killed somebody is if their body drops. You don't get a notification or a giant 89 experience points explosion on your screen, so you better make that one open shot count. Also, snipers like to hide in the rubble because that is where they are most lethal. They blend in well with their surroundings, and the only way you can find them is when they fire their rifle. Essentially what I'm saying is, prepare to die. A lot. Players move just like the real Nazis or Soviet soldiers would. What I mean by that is depending on what type of character you're playing, a rifleman, machine gunner, sharpshooter, it affects the way they run. Why? Because soldiers are trained to run certain ways when they carry specific guns. If you are a sniper, you wouldn't be holding a machine gun the same way you hold a rifle. Each side moves differently because Nazis were trained one way and Soviet trained another. They also wore different outfits for their class. Soviet riflemen wore soft hats while machine gunners had hard helmets. So once you play long enough, you'll be able to figure out exactly what type of soldier is on the horizon. Tanks are also something completely unique in Red Orchestra. Normally when you play a game that has some sort of vehicle, you can drive it, shoot its main gun, or machine gun all at the same time. But that isn't how tanks actually work. In Red Orchestra, you have a tank commander who is the eyes and ears of the crew that relays orders down to the others. Along with the commander, the crew consists of a driver, gunner, and a loader. Since the loader has only one job, it's actually done by the computer. The driver and commander can pop open a hatch above them and give themselves a better view of the battlefield. While it improves vision, it also makes you a target for snipers. If one crew member is killed, one of the other 3 will have to take his place. At this year's GDC, I had the pleasure of meeting the vice president of Tripwire Interactive, Alan Wilson, and it was obvious to me that this man and his company love guns, and Red Orchestra is proof of that. Every gun in the game has been painstakingly remodeled after its real-life counterpart. Every detail is correct, from muzzle blast to where the serial numbers are. It's not often you see such love given to something that you really don't look at while you're playing. Like Ostfront, battles drop due to gravity, so you have to compensate for distance. Also, if you have a machine gun, you'll be able to deploy its tripod while prone, or up against some cover, giving you much more stability. This is also the only way to aim down the sights, because you can't hold an MG42 up against your shoulder like a rifle. While the guns are impressive, it's the sound design that made me smile. Tripwire's love for authenticity again shines because each gun sound is spot on. Just go to any gun range, or hell, look up a YouTube video of a KAR-98 and it'll sound just like the in-game rifle. Tanks squeak as their treads move over water, shell casings ping you to the left or behind you depending on where they land, and grenades cause concussions depending on how close you are. If you're playing as the Soviets, you can understand what other Soviet soldiers are saying, but when a German soldier speaks, he's speaking German. It's the same way if you play as a Nazi, the Soviets speak Russian. I can't tell you how many times I've been saved by hearing a Nazi speak in the other room, confirming my suspicions that it was an enemy moving around and not an ally. You can't just shoot everything you see, because friendly fire is on. It's just another notch to immerse you in this game. There is a single-player campaign and an extensive multiplayer component to Red Orchestra 2. The first half of the single player has you reliving the Battle of Stalingrad from day one of the invasion through the Germans' perspective. When you play the game, you're in control of a squad of soldiers. If you die, you'll be transplanted into one of the other squad mates. After about 2 minutes, your squad will be replenished with men. If your squad is killed before it can be replenished, the game is over. The objective of single player is usually to have you capturing strategic points of the city and advancing to the next area, or having you defending the area once you've captured it. To capture a point, you will need more of your team inside the area to slowly take it over. Multiplayer is essentially the same as the single player, except you don't have a squad, you're just a single soldier. You will respawn though, this isn't a one life per round type of game. At the beginning of each match, you can choose which class you want to be, but only a certain amount of that class can be playing at once. For example, there can only be 1 or 2 snipers per game. This forces you to actually play the game as a team, and not have each side simply hiding in the rubble the entire round. You can also form squads, so when you're killed, you can choose to respawn next to your squad commander as opposed to a specific point. Realism and authenticity is fun, but at the end of the day, the big question is the game fun? Absolutely. But it should be noted there is a massive learning curve here, especially if your FPS experience consists of merely Call of Duty and Halo games. It's quite funny playing because you can see who only plays Call of Duty and Halo games because they'll just run out in the middle of the battlefield and be killed instantly. The game is about cover and advancing, not being a one-man army. Now I know why soldiers love playing Call of Duty and Battlefield games. They aren't at all what they experience on a day-to-day basis. It's make-believe in its purest sense. Red Orchestra 2 is the closest to war one can get, save for joining the military. I really like the multiplayer aspect of this game, especially if you have a team that knows how to play. I really enjoy Red Orchestra 2, but I can't recommend it for everybody. It is a unique game, and it's an experience you've never had before. War is hell, and Red Orchestra 2 makes you understand that statement all too well.